Hello there, and a very good afternoon to you. Welcome once again to our Q&A sessions with Professor Michael Clarke. Professor Clarke, thank you very much for being with us, and good afternoon to you. We're going to focus on the situation in the Iran war today, as we did last week. We've had loads of questions come in again. Thank you very much for that. As always, the requests for you guys, if you want to ask a question as we're going along, please do. You can do so on our YouTube channel, or you can message us directly. Let's crack on, because we've got a full list here this week, haven't we, Michael? Lots of good stuff to get through. We're going to start with a question here from JC. Asked simply, is the United States losing this war?
No, but it's not winning it in any political sense, because if you look at all the things that President Trump said he wanted to achieve, some of them I'm sure will be achieved, but none of them have been achieved yet. So the four things he laid out on the 28th of February, when he made that rather strange 8-minute video about, we're now at war, we've launched attacks. One was to destroy Iran's nuclear capacity, such as it still exists. 2, to destroy its ballistic missile capacity, such as it still exists. 3, to destroy its navy and its ability to project power. 4, to create the opportunity for the opposition to take control of the government. And I suppose underlying that, number 5, it was to destroy the government, to make sure that the Islamic Revolution comes to an end. So none of those things have yet been achieved. Some of them probably will be. The ballistic missile capacity will be. The Navy probably will be. The Americans say, rightly, CENTCOM, Central Command, have said that we sunk 51 ships, which is a lot. But remember that the Iranians started this war with about 140 odd ships, right. Many of them very small, maybe just coastal cutters. But nevertheless, on paper, they had 140 odd ships. So the Americans have destroyed a lot of ships, but there is still a navy of sorts in existence for as long as it can keep going, or does keep going. So no, the Americans have not yet lost, but they haven't achieved any of their 4 or 5 major objectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think you described it as a war looking for a strategy. Do we know at this stage, what are we, 12 days in, what the actual strategy is? We keep hearing really bellicose language from the Americans, especially that war secretary.
Yes, from Pete Hegseth, we hear the most bellicose. And I think, in future, he might regret some of the things he said as history starts to pick apart, what they're doing. I mean, I think what we're faced with is an America at the moment which is enthralled to its own destructive powers.
It has immense power.
It has immense destructive power.
Violence.
And it is enthralled to its own destructive power. So the most coherent statement has come from, as you might expect, from Dan Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And he said, we are carrying, we've got a target set, a very big target set, and we're carrying on our campaign so as to deprive Iran of the power to project itself outside its own borders. So it will not be able to do anything militarily, or by implication much politically either, outside its own borders. Now that is an achievable objective. They haven't remotely achieved it yet, but that is an achievable military objective, but that's not a political objective. And when people said to Dan Kane and then Pete Hegseth, who was standing next to him at the press conference, he said, well, what does that mean politically? And Hegseth said, oh, that's up to the boss. That is up to the president. President Trump, will decide. And President Trump changes on a daily basis. So, yes, this is war. It is a very destructive war. It's a very impressive military campaign in search of a strategy. And none of us really believe that the president has a strategy that he's not talking about, because he talks about everything that's in his head. I mean, we have to believe that he's just ranging across a series of options because he doesn't really know where this war is going.
And so may land on one of them, be it the destruction of the Navy, and then say, that's it, achieve that, we can move on.
What most of us expect is, and the word taco has come back again, the taco president, this will be a taco war, Trump always chickens out, that the president probably quite soon, what, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe, will declare victory and leave.
Right.
And when he declares victory, he'll say, we've achieved this, and this, and the world will sit back and say, well, have you really? So I think that's probably going to be the outcome, because the pain of this war is already, after less than 2 weeks, is already much greater on the region, on the world economy, and on the United States' reputation around the world. It's much greater than he or most other people thought it would be. They thought it would be a war that would start in one way with a big American-Israeli strike and maybe go up the escalation ladder, and the Americans would be able to control that escalation ladder. But actually it went quite near to, not the top rung, but it went a long way up the ladder within 24 hours because the Iranians indicated they'll do anything. From their point of view, we talk about wars of choice, wars of necessity. This is a war of choice for America. Didn't have to do it. It had lots of other options. It wasn't even a major problem for them, the Iranian military power, Iranian nuclear power. We could talk about that all morning. It really was pretty poor. But the Americans have chosen to go to war for all sorts of instinctive reasons on the part of the president. For the Iranians, for the Iranian regime, brutal and nasty and unpleasant as they are, this is a war of necessity. They have no choice but to fight this war. It's a necessity for them because they're fighting for their survival as a regime and a theocratic regime. As far as they're concerned, they're fighting for God. They're fighting for God's presence. A reverend, somebody or other, wrote to me this week to say I shouldn't use the word God in talking about the Iranians.
Because?
Because I should talk about the Prophet Muhammad. Okay. Well, the Prophet Muhammad was a prophet. I mean, the three great Abrahamic religions are monotheistic. They all believe in a God, one God.
Absolutely
so I'm using I'm sorry, Reverend, but I'm using the phrase God.
Not often we say so.
As far as the Iranians concerned, the Iranian revolution exists because God wants it to exist, and in defending it, they're doing God's work. So they are fighting a war of necessity, and they'll fight it with whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. Whereas the Americans are fighting a war of choice, and a war of choice can only go so far before you do a cost-benefit analysis. Are the benefits we've got out of choosing to fight now less than the cost of doing so?
And we will see, as you say, Trump is, let's call him mercurial today. So we'll see where he lands on that. We're going to focus on US casualties of war. Now, John wants to ask, of the US casualties that we know of, how have they come about, and could more have been done to protect them? We've got some numbers here. I think about 140 have been injured. We saw that, is it called dignified transfer, when they bring the bodies home? I think 6 service personnel were brought home.
Yeah, I think it was 6 or 7. I have to say, I just don't know. I've been asking myself that question, and I haven't dug around so far about it, but I don't know.
Are they keeping it sort of under wraps?
As far as I know, yes. Yeah. I mean, there must be an answer, in the Pentagon will know the answer. I have to say, I just don't know. How. I mean, that was my first question. How have these casualties been caused? Was it a single explosion that killed 4 or 5 people who just, in the wrong place when a drone landed or a missile? That's the most likely outcome, but I'm guessing totally. And the 140 or so injured, is that in one incident, or is that a cumulative total?
Well, I've got the Pentagon spokesperson, Sean Pennell, who says since the start of the operation, approximately 140 US service members, have been wounded over the 10 days of sustained attacks. These vast majorities are minor. 108 have already returned to duty. 8 are listed as severely injured and are receiving the highest level of medical care.
Yeah, it'll be debris from something. And also, people are listed, quite rightly, as wounded if there's been accidents. I mean, vehicles turn over. There's some sort of domestic accident. There are always casualties on any military operation because of the law of averages. If you've got 10,000, 20,000, in the case of the Americans, 40,000 troops in the Middle East, some of them are going to meet with accidents. They would, whether there's a war on or not. And that goes, they become part of the list because they've been injured in the course of a war.
But we're not sure how. Whether it's
the answer is I just don't know at the moment how they've been caused.
Okay, well, is it normal then for there not to be that information? We're in such an information-rich age. Is it normal to not have detail like that?
Normally, if we were doing it, once the next of kin had been informed, then you would give some information about how it happened. Because that's a matter of some interest. I mean, is there a negligence issue? Was it just in the nature of things? And of course, the next of kin, of course, they want to know how it happened.
Absolutely.
And so journalists normally say to them, "How do you feel about it? That your son has been killed doing this or that." And most of the parents in Afghanistan, in case of British casualties, said strikingly similar things. They said, he died doing what he loved. He died in an organisation that he loved. Most of them said that. And I remember one father, it was very moving actually. He said, I wasn't much of a father to my lad, but the army were, and they loved him and he loved them. So I accept that. It was astonishing that he said that.
Incredible, isn't it? I mean, that sacrifice for the individual and the family. Just on those 6 who did have that dignified transfer back to the US earlier in the week, the reporting from the New York Times says that they all were killed in an unmanned aircraft. attack on a port in Kuwait. So I mean
that's a drone attack,
right?
Yeah, okay.
Drone strike.
That's a new one on me then. That's in the New York Times.
The New York Times reporting today.
I shall look for it when I get back.
It's got the names of the individuals, some photographs as well of those 6 who've had that dignified transfer back to the US. So that, I mean, that's a drone strike. So that, and that was in the early days of the war. Okay, let's move on to the next question here. This is coming from Harry Mao, saying there are conflicting messages. One moment we hear Iran's missiles have been severely degraded, and then we hear that Iran has launched its most intensive barrage so far. What's accurate? How successful have US-Israeli strikes been on diminishing their missiles?
Well, the numbers mounting up. So the numbers as of last night that I saw were that the United States have said that they've launched now over 5,000 attacks. So over 5,000 targets have been hit one way or another. And the Israelis think that they've degraded, they thought something like over 50% of the launchers that the Iranians have got. Now, the Iranians were believed to have, say, 400 or 500 launchers for about 2,500 ballistic missiles. And the Israelis think that they've probably only got 100 to 200 left, and that the Israelis have accounted for 300 of their launchers. Because obviously, if you hit a launcher, that's worth several missiles in the sense that if you can't launch, you can't use them. So the Israelis are well on the way to hitting the launchers, and the Americans as well. And we're just going by the figures that are being put out. So big figures. But the figures we started with was that Israeli intelligence thought that the Iranians had 2,500 ballistic missiles and tens of thousands of drones.
Yes, well, we've seen that footage, haven't we, of those drones?
That's right. And and it's interesting. I mean, this whack-a-mole strategy. I mean, when the ballistic missiles are being launched, they're in these some call them missile cities, which are inside the mountains.
I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah.
I've seen some footage, seen some reporting about this. I mean, essentially, it's sort of described as being almost like Hamas did beneath Gaza, building these huge, vast tunnel networks. Is that right?
True.
That's what they've done?
Remember, the Iranians have been working on this for a long time. They've been anticipating something like this for 20 years, and much more so in the last 12 months since the war of the 12-day war of last year. So yes, these missile cities certainly exist, and the Americans are trying to locate them and block the entrances because they realise that if they can block the entrances, then it bottles the whole thing up, and they're having, it seems, some success in doing that. But where the Iranians can get these TELs out, the transporter erector launcher, if they can take it to a pre-prepared site, they can fire off within 10 minutes.
Yep.
If it's to an unprepared site, it's more like 30 minutes.
Is that right? Because of what, the targeting that's needed?
Exactly, yeah. Just got to get the coordinates in, and they need to make sure they've got the vehicle in the right place properly, and stable and all the rest of it. Once they've fired, then their days are numbered. I mean, they have got to get that TEL out of the way quickly, or they've got to abandon it, because within a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, the launch will be spotted by satellites. That brings in American air power that's just circling, just waiting for a target, and in they come and they'll bomb it. So the people who are running these TELs are, they know they're on a suicide mission. They must do, but that's the point. They're popping up where they can, launching a missile, and then if they can escape, but it's 50-50 whether they do or not. So the whole process is either a 10-minute or a 30-minute process, depending on where they're going. And the Americans and the Israelis are closing them down bit by bit. But it's not the same with drones, because obviously ballistic missiles take a bit of launching. It's a vehicle. The TEL goes up. It sort of rises. Then they put the coordinates are in. Then they have to stand back from it. There's a 10-second countdown, and off it goes. With drones, I mean, particularly the Shahid drones, they're in racks of 5 on the back of a truck.
Right. And
the truck is, just pull the tarpaulin off or whatever it is. The 5 drones simply are on racks, and off they go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. Wow. And they're away. So the drones, although they're not as destructive, of course, of ballistic missiles, and they can be brought down a lot more easily, in sheer numbers, they can still be destructive. And what we've heard in the last 24 hours, these 3 ships that have been hit in the Strait of Hormuz look as if they've been hit by drones.
Right.
Not missiles. Looks like it so far.
I was thinking about the launching of these drones and the way that they sort of try and launch in waves. What is the strategy of how they launch these drones? Do they sort of fire off, as you say, 5 at a time, and then wait and then fire off another 5? How would you send a drone swarm if you were targeting?
Well, what they did when they were attacking Israel in a more organised way last year and the year before, these attacks against the Iron Dome system in Israel, they were quite carefully timed. So they'd send the drones off early because they're slower, and then when they thought the drones were arriving over Israeli defences and will distract the defence, then the ballistic missiles would come in, which are obviously much faster. That's what they were doing then, but I don't think they can be doing that now because the command system has been hit, and so they're doing everything in a decentralised way, which is why a lot of the reactions we're seeing is Iranian instinctive reactions and pre-planned reactions, which is why I suspect that they've been hitting out towards Azerbaijan and towards Turkey and so on. I think that's probably part of it's on the spreadsheet somewhere rather than a strategic decision taken in Tehran is what I would suspect. But I think what they're doing with the drones is they're getting off what they can when they can, and undoubtedly the capacity to launch ballistic missiles and drones is far less than it was a week ago. But if I was in their position and I still had reasonable stocks left, if I still had a few hundred ballistic missiles and a few thousand drones, then I would try and choose a time, in a few days' time, when the United States is making comments about we're winding up the war, and I'd have a day of maximum effort.
Okay.
I'm just guessing, but if it was me, I'd say we'll set a day of maximum effort and we'll fire off a lot.
Just to show that we can at this point.
Yeah. And in as coordinated a way as possible.
Yeah.
Because the Americans keep saying, look, we're dealing with their drones, we're dealing with the missiles, they've got very few left.
Yeah.
And say, if I was them, I would demonstrate on some day next week that wasn't true. Because that would have a political effect in Washington. That's the whole point. They want to work on American public and congressional opinion. That's the target.
Yep.
Just like in the Viet Cong, the Tet Offensive, famously the Tet. The Viet Cong came out into the cities in 1969 in the Tet Offensive. It was a huge offensive, and they lost everywhere. They lost everywhere in Vietnam, but they won in Washington.
They showed that they could do it. They came out
and they destroyed the ability of the administration then, Lyndon Johnson, to say we can win this war. No, you can't. Look what's happened. So they lost on the ground, but they won in Washington. That's what I suspect. I mean, if I was in the Iranian government, that's what I'd be looking to do.
So we keep hearing about this diminishing fire rate, and I was thinking about this as well. Got a line here that Iran's missile fire rate has collapsed by 92%. Now, that could be two things, couldn't it? It could be that they have had that number of missiles available to them reduced, or it could be that they were just reducing the frequency that they're firing their missiles.
It could be they're holding back and they're reorganising. That would be logical as well. So we don't know. I mean, if my kind of hypothetical strategy for the Iranians is right, then I guess we'd see some sort of uptick in the next week or 10 days.
Have the numbers been run by the Israelis or the Americans, and have they announced where they... I'm trying to get an end to the war here again. Where they think, at what point they will have diminished what they think is there in storage?
Well, they've said zero is the what they want. They want to destroy ballistic missiles.
So how long would that take them? If they just they just don't know.
We don't know, but it's going to be weeks and months because they don't know entirely what they've destroyed unless they're on the ground. And we know, because the Iranians have been working on this for many years, this possibility, they've hidden as much of their capacity, nuclear as well as ballistic missiles, and manufacturing as well. Interestingly, the Americans have just started using their bunker buster bombs, flying their B-2s, to get at the bunkers where they say the manufacturing for ballistic missiles is going on. And that's, again, entirely plausible. I don't know how many targets they've hit, but it sounds as if they've hit several. I mean, let's guess something like, a dozen or so, not 50 or 60 at the moment, but probably a dozen. And they undoubtedly have been the storage and manufacturing sites for ballistic missiles, maybe drones as well, but particularly the missiles.
Just a question, something I saw knocking around social media, I don't know how true this is. The Iranians have bunker busters. Is that correct?
Don't think so.
Okay, fine.
I'm not aware of it.
That's a social...
Because they don't have aircraft to drop them.
No, I mean, and that was my next question. They'd have to be delivered by aircraft. You couldn't fire a bunker buster from a missile.
None of those that I know of. Right. The BLU 59, I think it is, Big Blue 59. I mean, these are big bombs, and they have to be carried by heavy aircraft.
Right.
You can't get them can't put them on the nose of a missile.
Interesting. Okay, well there you go. Cleared something up that social media once again lying to me. Typical. All right, let's move on to to questions here about shipping, the Strait of Hormuz, and, well, the effect it's going to have on all of us. Josephine is asking, how will the West cope if the Strait is closed for 6 months or more? You've got an idea about sort of like redundancy in oil, right? Talk us through that. And
I mean, the general view and the people I've been talking to in the last week or 10 days indicate that if the disruption is, let's say, a couple of months' worth, the prices will certainly spike. But they can come down again because, as you and I have been talking about for months, the trend is downwards in terms of oil and gas prices over the long term. It won't always be downwards, but it is at the moment. So there'll be a spike in prices. However, if this crisis goes on, let's say, for 3 months or longer, then what happens then is that the increased prices become structural. It becomes self-generating because then it adds to inflation, and inflation adds to other sorts of transport costs, and it's hard to get back to normal. And also, I mean, the oil industry is kind of self-correcting. So when prices are high, more oil is produced because the price is high. That creates a glut, so prices go down because there's too much oil. And as prices go down, then there is a sense in which people stop producing because it's not making enough profit. So then there's a shortage. Prices go high. So this business where your prices go up and down over a period of, let's say, 3 or 4 years. And it is sort of self-regulating. Right. When prices are high, more oil comes onto the market. When prices are low, people stop producing.
So in 6 months' time, what are we thinking? I mean, will that impact still be there?
Yeah. If the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed or running at, say 10 or 20% transit capacity after 6 months, then the world economy will be in trouble. For sure. I mean, we're then looking at another global recession because of the knock-on effects. And as they always say, the problem with oil infused inflation is that a lot of it goes upstream. Is that it's inflation first of all on the price of petrol, and that affects the price of generating other sorts of product, and that affects the price of fertilizers and food, and so all the effects go upstream, and then it takes a long time, say, for the increase in the price of food to come down into the shops. So what you inject into it now in an inflationary way takes another 3 or 4 months to hit the shops, and that's the problem. A lot of the inflation goes upstream. You don't see it to begin with, but it's there, and it takes a while to work its way through.
Question here from Robert: how could the US stop attacks in the Strait of Hormuz and restore shipping, or is the drone threat almost impossible to eliminate?
No, it's not impossible to eliminate. And CENTCOM, Central Command, and the Admiralty and the British defence planners have thought about this for many years because it's always been a possibility.
You'd have to have a plan for this, wouldn't you? Because you probably knew that if you went to war with Iran, that it would be.
It's got to be absolutely. It's one of the scenarios. It's an obvious scenario. And I don't know why it wasn't a bit more obvious to the White House that if they start a war, the Strait of Hormuz... I
wonder why that White House hadn't thought ahead.
The Strait of Hormuz is likely to close. I think the answer was they thought that was a possibility, but it was so high up the escalation chain,
they thought they might not do it.
They wouldn't get there. They thought they could produce an outcome before the Iranians did anything like that. But of course, the Iranians have gone right at the top of the chain, the escalation ladder, say, quite early on. So there's lots of plans to do it. And yes, of course it can be done, but it's expensive and it takes military hardware on the ground. So what do you do? If you look at the Red Sea, the Houthis attacked at the Red Sea, that created a zone of about 50 miles of sea that was unsafe. And the Allies were able to make that into a box. So there's a box of, and you defend the box with air defence destroyers and aircraft operating out of bases, patrolling and so on. So you defend inside the box and you hit anything that is trying to attack into the box. That was a 50-mile long box. Now the Gulf is 200 miles. That's too big for a box, really. So what you need to do is you need a gun line of destroyers, of air defence destroyers, on a gun line, as it's called, all the way along the Gulf, facing the Iranian coast. Wow. So anything coming from the Iranian coast is going to have to get through the gun line, and it's got all its missiles to shoot things down. Then you're probably almost certainly going to have to use air power to attack anything on the Iranian side of the coast. Anything that moves, really, or when you see launchers, when you see anything that looks like a launcher, you've got to attack it. So you've got to make it really hard for them to do anything. Then you've got to deal with mini submarines. They've got about 25 submarines. About 20 of them were thought to be mini submarines.
These are manned, are they? Manned vehicles?
Yes, not robotic.
Yep.
But they are. Just the way drug runners have mini submarines. So the Iranians have got them. And as far as I know, I think the United States has only accounted for one of them so far. So they still exist.
Yikes.
And as and when they come out, they'll probably be on something close to a suicide mission.
I was going to say, are they suicide subs? Are they
pretty well?
Right, yeah.
And then there's robotics. There's drone craft that they've used of the sort that the Ukrainians use. And then there's random shots with drones and maybe missiles from the coast. So you've got to have a gun line of destroyers. You've got to have air power attacking anything on the coast. And still, you've probably got to put ships into convoys where they're traveling with defensive ships that can zip around. If they see a robot coming, they can either launch or fire to robot thing coming at them.
So you have brave captain as well.
Yeah, so quite small convoys. You can't have 20 or 30 ships in a convoy. You could have probably 4 or 5 because you've got to be able to look after 4 or 5 ships. If you are the warship, you don't have to look after 20. It'd be like a sheepdog with too many sheep to worry about. You've got to look after 4 or 5 at a time. It'd be that sort of thing. So yes, it can be done, but it's very intensive. And I'm pretty sure that the Iranians would quite welcome that because, as I keep saying, it brings the Americans into fighting low down and dirty on my territory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the chance of getting lucky, the chance of being able to disrupt it would still be high.
You hit one of those things, you hull it, and you start an ecological disaster.
And the merchant marine have still got to decide to give it a go. Now, the Americans have introduced their reinsurance. Which is called the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, which has allocated $20 billion to insure the insurers. You know this thing in Britain called Pool Re, which is insuring the insurers against flood risk.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the costs go so high. So this is like a guarantee to insurers at $20 billion that if insure those ships and we'll guarantee $20 billion's worth of insurance to you if you get caught with it. Well, that's what they've announced to try and calm the merchant marine market. But JP Morgan, the bank, they've said, there's 330 odd tankers who would normally want to get through the straits. If you look at the risk, you need about 350 billion, not 20 billion.
Wow.
And there's an argument about, well, how much do you really need? Because what JP Morgan is saying is, look, if you actually destroy a tanker, there'll be an environmental disaster.
Absolutely.
And that's an insurance claim. And if you create an insurance disaster or environmental disaster for Dubai, say, or for the United Arab Emirates, the first thing they will do is sue the United States. So, the idea of reinsurance is a good one, but the US is not committing anything like the amount of money that JP Morgan says you would need to commit. 20 billion doesn't touch the sides.
No.
If the real liability, even with all these measures in place that we've just discussed, is in the order of 350 billion.
A whole lot more. I mean, the French have got a plan, haven't they?
Yep.
They're sending some shipping. I'm looking here online. They're sending approximately 10 to 11 vessels, including the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group as well, to attack.
Because they can put one together and we can't.
I thought you might just skip past that one, but you couldn't resist it.
Gosh, I feel for the Royal Navy. I really do. I really do. This is, everything that has happened in this crisis has been bad for the Navy. And it's the way things are. It's all of their vulnerabilities have been cruelly exposed.
It's on its way now. Dragon is moving. It
is. Yeah, it left port
steaming. Do you describe these ships as steaming in this day?
Yeah, steaming.
It's steaming on its way.
They do steam. Yeah,
it's on its way there.
Yeah.
But we're not.
Diesel.
We're not thinking about sending the aircraft carrier anymore. That was when I was working over the weekend. There was a lot of talk about that.
That's a stupid idea. I mean, the Prince of Wales is due. The aircraft carrier is due to go to the High North.
Yeah,
that was announced at the Munich Security Conference by Keir Starmer. He said, "No, we're sending in the carrier, which will cooperate with its allies, which it will. The Norwegians will be there, and US will be there, and Canada will be there. The US will land its F-35s on it. So it's a perfectly good thing for the Prince of Wales to be doing. Sending it to Cyprus is just barking mad, or would be barking mad, because an aircraft carrier is just a floating airfield.
It's a floating runway.
Right. So why are you sending a floating airfield to defend a bigger
one right there.
ground airfield? Yeah, you've got plenty of ability to launch aircraft. Why do you need a carrier? All you're doing is putting another big target in the way.
Yep.
So all the things a carrier could do, defending Aquateria is probably the least useful. The other things you might do,
it could project power though, couldn't it?
Right? It might be used for something else.
Yeah.
In the region, it might be used for strikes if we ever to get to that, or it might be for evacuation. I mean, carriers have got medical facilities on board, they've got operating theatres. Carriers can do lots and lots of good things, but in terms of their basic requirement of being a floating airfield, you send them where you don't have airfields.
Don't have airfields to
send them to Eastern Mediterranean,
off.
where we've got airfields all over the place. It's just plain silly, which is why we're not going to do it.
It's not happening. Not happening. No, it is not happening. It's going up to the High North. Let's remember as well, the reason it's going to the High North is to placate Trump over the Greenland thing,
and we're responsible. We're responsible for the High North now. We've taken command of Joint Forces Command in Norfolk, Virginia, which means that our NATO role, Britain's NATO role, is to be the commander of the northern sector of NATO, which means the North Atlantic. Entirely appropriate. It's what we should do. It's what we should do, and that's where the carrier will make some difference. And we need more frigates and destroyers, of course, if we're going to perform that role properly.
And that's the Prince of Wales. Queen Elizabeth is
the other one. Now that's out for that's on long-term maintenance. So again, we've only got one carrier. Of the two carriers, we've only got one of them that is able to go to sea at the moment. The other one is a long way from going to sea. And we've got RFA Lyme Bay, which has been alongside in Gibraltar for a long time. And that's the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. We're bringing that ready to a state of readiness. Well, the Lyme Bay is in very, very low readiness. It's got a skeleton crew on board. And the Ministry of Defence is announcing, we're bringing it to readiness in case we need it. I mean, one thing they've got to find is enough RFA sailors. I mean, there's a big problem with the Fleet Auxiliary. I mean, the sailors have been on strike for a long time. We've been taking industrial action. I'm not even sure they could man it properly. And so we're talking about bringing the Lyme Bay back into service. It's been sitting alongside Gibraltar doing nothing for a long time. And it's on deep maintenance, as they call it. And it would have been April or May before it was anything like ready to go. But if they can get it ready in a hurry, well, fine,
But as you say, it just exposes the paucity of the ability to get that fleet.
Humiliating, it's pathetic, and it shows our allies that we talk a big game about being a leading nation, and in this case, at least in maritime terms, we've been seen as threadbare.
Yeah, I put it to David Lammy, actually.
Not always. I mean, not in air terms. I mean, the RAF is working very hard and doing pretty well.
12th Squadron out of Qatar.
Exactly, yeah. The 12th Squadron doing very well. And we've got the Typhoons at Akrotiri have beefed up. I mean, we're deploying most of our active Typhoon force at the moment. Right. And we are defending our allies. We're actively defending Bahrain, UAE, Qatar. We've intercepted drones, all of which are heading for those places. So the Air Force are having a good time, not good time, but the Air Force are showing what they can do. The poor old Navy's been caught out in just about every respect by the timing of this crisis.
Yeah. All right. Another question here from Kevin. You kind of answered it, but let's talk about it in a bit more detail anyway. Could oil tankers themselves be equipped with anti-drone weaponry?
Not easily. I know the point. Because you need all the stuff that goes with it. So you need all of the radars and the target acquisition, as it's called, the ISTAR, intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance, ISTAR. And I mean, you could put them on the tankers, but remember, the tankers come and go through the straits, and then they're off to Indonesia and then South America for 3 or 4 months. It would be a rather difficult thing to do. It's more efficient to have all the anti-drone stuff on warships, which is what they're designed to do, and to have the warships close to the tankers. Yep. And the drawback, of course, is that there are never enough warships to escort enough tankers through a difficult sea passage. So one can imagine a situation where the straits open with this kind of heavy military presence, but open only at a low level. That it just takes time to get everything through. Yep. Because you've got to get all the military stuff in place before you can take this group of 5 and then the next group of 5. And so we might end up with kind of 10 or 20% of normal traffic going through Hormuz if things worked out quite well.
Well, and I presume because of the reduction in capacity, that would still be inflationary. But I wonder how the markets would sort of price that in.
Yeah, it would still have a big knock-on effect. Yeah,
things were going to be actually moving though.
Yeah, and then the United States, if it was taking the lead on this, which of course it would have to create an expectation in the market that it will get better.
Yeah.
If the expectation was, look, it's going to be 20%, volume for the next 12 months, the markets will price that in.
Yeah, precisely.
And make their decisions. But if the idea is, look, it's 20% now, but it's getting better all the time, in another couple of months we'll be back to normal, then the markets will relax if they believe that.
Interesting. Question here from Chris, and it's one that I've had. I think I've actually put it to you as well about the Houthis. Do the Houthis have the military capability to attack shipping passing through the Bab el Mandeb Straits? That's on the Gulf.
Down at the southern end of the Red Sea.
Yeah, absolutely, on the other side of that peninsula there. And if so, as an Iranian proxy, why haven't they started to get involved?
Yeah, good question. And I don't know what the answer is. The Houthis have said that they will join in. And you would expect them to say that because this is a war that the anti-Israeli war is a war that they made their own after the 7th of October 2023, which, the atrocity that the Hamas atrocity that began all this against Israel, began this. You say all this, people always complain when I say all this has been going on for 40 years. Yes, I know. But, this particular cumulative crisis, began effectively in October 2023. And the Houthis have said, yes, they will be part of this, but so far not. Now, I don't think it's lack of weapons on their part. I think they are thinking about what has happened. Right. And I think that they are putting together maybe some sort of strategy. They do have anti-ship missiles. We don't know how many, but they've used them. They do have drones, and they do have boats, small boats. And with the tension so much on the Strait of Hormuz, they might feel that they will get their moment, one day, 1 or 2 days, where there's not much warship activity around their part of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and they'll come out and they'll attack a couple of ships. And again, they've only got to do it once or twice to create an extra anxiety that in addition to Hormuz, then another maritime zone of instability has opened up at the bottom of the Red Sea. But it's curious that they haven't done so yet, that's all.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of wondering whether there is a pacing going on here. They're waiting because there is talk of the Saudis trying to get their oil out through the Red Sea to bring it around that way, which then
they can, because they've got the big pipeline that goes down to their port on the halfway along the Red Sea. And again, they can get quite a lot. They can't substitute entirely, but they can get a lot of their stuff out via the Red Sea because they've got the pipeline that does it. If the Red Sea then was more difficult, they couldn't get out southwards. They could only get out northwards through Suez. Right. And again, that's got its problems,
limitations. Yeah, absolutely.
It may be that the Houthis are, in a sense, waiting to if they're. I mean, they do take orders from Tehran, and it may be that because Tehran is trying to elongate their activities to make their hostility last as long as possible. Maybe they'll, as it were, bring the Houthis into it or tell the Houthis to start activities when they feel as if it can help elongate their campaign.
We're going to move off that now, but just would you give us, Michael, just a thought about how these countries, these oil-rich nations, these gas-rich nations, are probably going to think going forward once this is all over. This will come to an end. Are we going to have to sort of rethink the way that oil gets out of this particular region? Do you think, in light of what's happened?
Well, I don't think it's going to get out in significantly different ways. You could say, well, let's have more pipelines, which will decrease the importance of the Gulf. But I mean, pipelines are expensive, and getting it out on massive tankers, 400,000-ton ultra tankers. There's very large tankers, there's ultra tankers, and the very large tankers are sort of 150, 200,000 tons, and the ultras are 350, 400, 450,000 tons. Massive ships. That will always be ton for ton cheaper than pipelines, and with bigger capacity. So I think that there'll always be that sense that the straits will be important for the future. Having said that, one other perspective we should draw is that the straits are not nearly as significant to world energy now as they were in the 1980s, the tanker war of 1980 to 88. The Iran-Iraq war of that year, which had a tanker war within it. And the oil crisis that we're looking at now is nothing compared to the crisis of the 1970s. When the oil crisis first began in the war of October 1973, and by December 73, oil prices had trebled, quadrupled, thanks to the Shah of Iran at the time. Yep. And that crisis of the 70s that went all through to the end of the 70s. I mean, the 70s was a really hard, miserable decade in lots of ways, with massive inflation, 20%, 22% inflation in Britain, 22%. We're nowhere near the severity in terms of shock to the world system that we had in the 70s. So in that respect, we should try and keep this in perspective. But the political issue, I think, is a really good one to raise, that after this, the Gulf states are very angry, I think, with the United States over this. The one state that didn't actively tried to dissuade President Trump was Saudi Arabia. I think they were more sort of 50-50 about their view of it. But all of the others just said, please don't do this. Don't do this because we fear retaliation. And it looks as if Trump said, oh, don't be silly. We've got this under control. Well, there you are. And so I think politically, the Gulf states will be looking for strengthening their partnerships with other reliable countries, and France and Britain.
Okay.
I mean, this is where
China.
France are making. Well, I was going to come to that.
Right.
France are making a killing politically by taking the advantage of Britain's perceived weakness in all of this, which means that we will regret lots of things about this reaction, I suspect. But the country that will really clean up politically will be China. Absolutely right. That whatever whatever is the malign side of Chinese policy, and it is very malign from our point of view on most aspects. But the Chinese, tell a good story when they say, look, we do things predictably. We do obey the rules. Actually, that's not true. They don't. But they say, look, we do obey the rules. We're not governed by this, crazed president who can't say the same thing from one day to the next. So we represent consistency. So they will clean up diplomatically at the end of this process. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. A question here from Rick about Iran's retaliation options. What are Iran's options in asymmetrical warfare? Is the worst to come? Does Iran have chemical weapons? And if so, could it use them?
Doesn't have chemical weapon stocks that we know of in any great amount. Certainly they are thought to have used chemicals in some of their assassinations and attempted assassinations around the world. I mean, like the Russians, they go around the world trying to assassinate their opponents, kidnap them, bring them back. I mean, they're a rogue state in that respect. But they're not thought to have massive chemical capacities. But their asymmetric warfare, you're absolutely right, will flow through cyber warfare. They're very persistent in cyber warfare, in undermining lots of aspects of the economies of their neighbours, which they've basically declared. They've apologised and they declared war on their neighbours. They've attacked their neighbours and apologised to them because they've said, well, in a way, it's your own fault for hosting American forces. We're attacking American bases, but we're also attacking other things. We don't like doing it, but we're doing it. And I think they'll continue to do that. And so asymmetric warfare will involve, cyber. It will involve subversion. It will involve attacks on neighbours. It will involve the Strait of Hormuz is their, I say, in more respects than one, is their trump card.
Right.
It's their pressure point that goes straight to the White House in lots of ways. And I think the Americans are only really waking up to how difficult this could be on the Strait, on the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf itself. And then the other thing that they'll do, they've still got lots of supporters around the world, so they've still got militias that they can direct. They still have influence on Hezbollah, although they're taking a pounding at the moment in Lebanon. And there are still lots of Iranians around the world who are prepared to commit terrorist acts. And I think we might
seen some arrests, haven't we?
Yeah, we might well see an upsurge in terrorism in Western Europe and the United States linked to Iranian sleepers, for want of a better word.
Yeah. Extraordinary. All right, question here from DJS5751.
Sounds like an intelligent.
I know, it's a code name, isn't it? Any update on the US bombers using Fairford, RAF Fairford? Do we know what they target? Surely they're not defensive. Is the UK getting dragged into this war by stealth? What do you think about that, Mark?
Okay. Well, Fairford, so it's been used for the B-1Bs, which are, multiple. They carry multiple
Big old
things.
strategic bomber.
Exactly, a strategic bomber, and the B-1s can carry a great range of cruise missiles or directed bombs, as they're known. I mean, guided bombs in effect. JDAMs are called, Joint Attack Demolition Munitions. And then B-52s, the redoubtable B-52s, they've been in and out of Fairford. And they're the same thing. Yeah. They can, such a heavy bomber, they can load them up with cruise missiles under the wings and in the fuselage and so on. So they can produce quite a lot of stuff. So it's B-1s or B-1Bs and B-52s that have used Fairford. The other thing, the bombers that have also been used are the B-2s.
Yep.
As far as I know, so far, I haven't seen any evidence of B-2s leaving Fairford on raiding missions.
Right.
But there have been B-2s over the targets. We know that because they've dropped bunker buster bombs. And the B-2 is the stealth bomber.
It is.
So it can go deep into enemy territory and not be detected and drop a bomb, old-fashioned style. Drop it over the target, which obviously getting an aircraft over the target makes it very vulnerable. But if it's a stealth bomber, then it's relatively safe to get right over the target. And the B-2s almost certainly have gone from Diego Garcia.
I was going to say coming out Diego Garcia.
Yeah, I don't think they've. I don't. There's no evidence they've gone from Fairford. What are they dropping? In all cases, in the B-1B and the B-52s and the B-2s, they're almost certainly as we're getting right over Iran, rather than on the fringes. They're not using standoff munitions where you get 100 miles away and then launch your weapon. They're getting over Iran to launch their weapons more precisely and deeper into Iran.
Yeah.
And those heavy bombers, they travel at considerable heights. They're high enough to be reasonably safe and accurate enough to, or the weapons they drop are accurate enough to hit the targets. Is Britain going to get pulled into this war? No. I think the British government is pretty clear. Whether it can hold on to this, I suspect it will. But what Britain is doing is protecting our assets from the blowback. So protecting our allies in the Gulf, we should do that. Protecting our own bases in the Gulf, say at Al Udeid, in Doha, or in Akrotiri in Cyprus. That's fine. That's all defensive. I cannot conceive that Britain would say, okay, we'll now start bombing Iranian sites in retaliation, and joining the American rationale for the war, which is that that we're taking down the Iranian regime. In effect, I don't think Britain's going to do that. I think we're going to let the Americans continue to use the bases because they're using them in pursuit of Iranian retaliation against them, which is why something that was judged illegal on Saturday the 28th became legal
once the Iranians
on the Sunday, because the Iranians had retaliated against all and sundry, and so there'll be arguments about this in years to come. But basically that makes what the Americans are doing, illegal in the first place, in my view, legal in the second place, and Britain is protecting its assets whilst that action goes forward.
Interesting.
But Britain, Keir Starmer, he's walking a tightrope.
I was going to say, it's a very fine line. If you start something that's illegal and then you carry on and then you get legality afterwards, I mean, as you say, will be litigated later on.
Yeah, but that's the problem. You say, look, you got, and it is a line, but it's a line that doesn't go down well with the tabloid press. It was illegal on Saturday, but it was legal on Sunday, and that's the kind of legal truth of it. Yeah, but that's very hard to argue that in front of public opinion.
Do the Iranians have that sort of nuanced position that the US are using our bases for defensive actions, or are we party to this war?
Part of the war. Yeah, that's what the Iranians are saying. Which is why the couple of missiles that look as if they're gone towards Turkey, or we don't know, but almost certainly they were going towards Incirlik, and that's the NATO airbase, big airbase in Turkey, which is being used as far as we know.
That's where they keep the nuclear bombers, isn't it, Incirlik?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we use it for all sorts. I mean, it's a big NATO base, and the Americans certainly use it, and we've used it on and off in the past. It looks as if, again, on the Iranian spreadsheet, Incirlik is one of the bases that they should attack.
I'm glad you brought Turkey up again. The line is brought down by NATO defences. What weapon system has been used to bring down those missiles? Do we know?
Don't know. I mean, it could be aircraft operating out of Incirlik, or it could be ground-based interceptors. I mean, mainly, I think, American interceptors.
Patriots.
It would have been, most likely. What it won't have been, I don't think, is the other interceptors which the Turkey's got, which are the Russian S-400s.
S-400s, yeah. I was going to say, which
been
they controversially purchased.
Yeah, I mean, Erdogan bought them in order to tweak NATO's tail and get close to it. And NATO said, if you set those things up, then you're out. We won't collaborate with you at all, because the S-400 will be linked into the NATO system.
There's a whole thing,
and everything goes back to Moscow.
Yeah.
Why would we allow that? And so they said, you might have bought these things as a political exercise. You set them up, and we will just freeze you out of our whole defensive system.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to come within the S-400's envelope, where all the information that it gathers then goes to Moscow.
No, there's a whole thing about the F-35, wasn't there? I don't think Turks...
That's right. So you've said the S-400, forget the F-35s. You can forget F-16s as well. The Turks wanted the new version, because there's lots of F-16s around. They wanted the modern version. So forget it.
You can't get the parts.
Can't have them with an S-400. Now, they did get it as part of the bargaining over getting Norway and Sweden into NATO.
Yes, there was that trade, wasn't there? Of course.
So they did get the
finally
F-16s.
relented and allowed them in.
Yeah. But Erdogan has not been so foolish, as I understand it. Anyway, he hasn't set up the S-400s, which is sensible.
I mean, what a thing to
So it won't have been S-400s.
It won't have been those, is what we're all saying. All right. Impact on Gulf states now. Question here from C. Are the Gulf states in danger of running out of air defence ammunition? What about Israel?
No, they won't, because the Americans will supply it. But the Americans have been getting a bit concerned that their stocks, they've got huge stocks, but they're running now into their reserve stocks that they keep at a certain level for the Indo-Pacific, and particularly for the possibility of defending Taiwan or other crises in the South China Sea or the Sea of Japan. And so the Americans will always keep their Patriot numbers high enough, but it's not endless.
Yeah.
They've got several thousand of them.
And they're each one millions of dollars once you fire it.
Every Patriot battery costs about $1 billion. And the launcher, or launchers and systems, costs about 400 million. And the weapons, the missiles, cost about 600 million.
Wow.
So it's about $1 billion for every big battery, every full battery of Patriots. And Zelensky in Ukraine last week, and he used a figure, I don't know where he got it from, I assume from Ukrainian intelligence, it's not been published by the Pentagon, but he said that in this week, and this was after 6 days of war, he said that the Gulf Arab states have fired off 500 Patriot missiles. 500, that was the figure he used. And he said, and that is more than we have had in 4 years.
Wow.
To make the point, that you, America, you're prepared to supply anything you like, anything they want in the Gulf. And, we've had less than 500 in 4 years of war against naked aggression. Yeah.
Stark point, well made.
I assume his figure was correct. I mean, that was his figure. I imagine
but
it will have been.
the point is well made, isn't it? And the point is well made because they've had to beg, steal, and borrow to get those Patriot batteries. And
Exactly.
I imagine that the Gulf states, with all of their resources, have been able to buy them in great number and have them
Batteries.
stockpiled. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's about something like 150 to 200 Patriot batteries in the world.
Right.
And I think there was something like 20 or 25 in Europe. And the Ukrainians had at one point they had 3 batteries, and it's obviously a classified figure how many they've got. But most people think they've probably got about 6 or 7, and they need 12 or so, and preferably more. But I mean, they now need something like 12. And the number in the Gulf and the number in the rest of the world, the number in America is massive. There's no comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Next one. Actually, we've kind of brought ourselves onto this question. It's about the effect on the war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. With all the drone manufacturing in Iran now not being sent to Russia for use against Ukraine, could this be a tipping point of Russia's invasion? I know what you're going to tell me. The Russians are making their own version of Shahad 136.
Yeah, they don't need it. I mean, short answer, we've talked about this before, haven't we? The short answer is the Iranians don't now supply the Russians with many drones. The Russians still wanted the ballistic missiles, particularly the Fatah 110. And the Shahad 2 ballistic missiles, and they got some of those, we believe, some but not many. Most of their foreign ballistic missiles seem to have come from North Korea. But as far as drones go, the famous Shahid 136, which is now the Geran 2 in Russia, being produced in Alabuga in Tatarstan, at this massive factory with lots and lots of foreign workers there. And the Ukrainians have hit it a few times. But it's well defended, and it's such a big factory. You would need a massive air campaign against it to put it out of action. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more questions, Mike. I realise I've kept you nearly an hour here. Sorry about this, but
we do.
I've enjoyed the conversation. I hope you guys have as well. A couple more questions, then, Mike, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, question here: what is Trump's next target? Talks about the capture of Nicolas Maduro. This is from Steve H. Says, could the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un be on the list, or does North Korea having that nuclear weapon mean it's just not on the menu?
Yeah, Kim Jong-un is not on the list.
No.
The United States doesn't really care about North Korea very much.
I heard some talk that they were going to actually have some conversation.
Yes, he's talked about opening a conversation with Kim Jong-un again.
Yeah.
I mean, much good did it do him last time. No, I'll tell you who's on the list, Cuba. All right. I mean, the Americans really Cuba is close to collapse. The government's close to collapse. The Secretary of State Rubio is very, very keen to bring
the Cuban heritage
down.
Yeah. Yep.
So Colombia, to the west, is also kind of on the list. But if you say to me, who is the government who is next in the sights of the White House, who probably will go with one push, whereas Iran certainly won't? Cuba.
And final question from Scotty: how is this war likely to win? We kind of talked about that, but Scotty asks, could there be a ground invasion, and if there was, what would that involve?
Do you know, there could. One of the things that the United States is thinking about doing is trying to take control of Kharg Island. Right, that's the island at the top of the Gulf.
Seen some reporting about this, right? Yes,
yeah.
Fascinating.
So, and that's 80-90% of Iran's oil exports at Kharg Island. Now, they can't get their exports out with the Strait of Hormuz closed. Kharg Island is not, is a transit terminal, leads nowhere. However, it's got storage capacity. It can store 30 million barrels of oil. Wow. Which is quite a lot. I mean, 100 million barrels a day is the daily use in the whole world market. So, 30 million barrels is quite a lot. If the Americans were to take control of Kharg Island, literally invade it, they could stop the Ukrainians storing oil. Then the oil backs up to the wells. It destroys the wells. Oil wells have got to keep on pumping.
Got to pump all the time.
If they can't store it somewhere, then the well is basically useless and has to be re-drilled. So if the Americans took control of Kharg Island, they would put the Iranian economy into an absolute crisis from the very beginning. But to take Kharg Island, they'd have to invade it.
Is it well defended?
Pardon?
Is it very well defended?
Not anymore.
Right.
However, and there was one other element here that last week, the 82nd Airborne, famous, the two big, 101st and the 82nd are the two premier airborne units. The 82nd were due on manoeuvres that were cancelled last week.
Last minute.
And so the 82nd have been held, as it were, in loco parentis, pending further orders. And the speculation was, they're going to pull the 82nd, because it would be the 82nd or the 101st who
you'd have to be airborne troops
to invade Kharg Island, but probably by helicopter.
Rather than Marines, to get...
Well, Marines might be involved, but I mean, Marines wouldn't land by sea, and that might be more dangerous. I mean, putting people in by air, heliborne, or even parachute, if you go back to the old days, it has happened. So it is plausible that one of the planning assumptions the Pentagon might be making is to use the 82nd Airborne to take control of Kharg Island. But boots on the ground, I mean, how that will go down in Congress and with the American public, you and I can only guess.
But you would have thought that...
And well, I'm not predicting it.
No.
I'm just saying it seems to be on the planning horizon to give the president options.
Well, you've mentioned it, and I've seen some reporting about that in the past couple of days, so it does seem as if it's something that is being
it's on the
talked
horizon
about, right? One would have thought that the Americans would have had that in mind prior to this campaign beginning, but who knows what they were planning. Michael, we've kept you 55 minutes there. Thank you so much.
Very good.
You guys enjoyed the conversation. We always do. Well, certainly I do anyway. And we'll do another Q&A next week. I imagine we'll keep focused on the situation in the Iranian war. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again very soon.